Effective persuasion requires more than passion. It demands sound reasoning. There are four essential tools for analyzing and constructing arguments: syllogisms, the Toulmin Model, logical fallacies, and psychological biases. Understanding these concepts helps you build stronger arguments and recognize weaknesses in others' reasoning. Syllogisms are a form of deductive reasoning developed by Aristotle. They consist of three major parts: a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. When structured correctly, syllogisms demonstrate how conclusions logically follow from the premises. The major premise is the general statement or universal truth. So, for example, all humans are mortal. The minor premise is a specific statement that relates to the major premise. For example, Socrates is a human. The conclusion is the logical result of the two premises. So, for example, if all humans are mortal and Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. Deductive and inductive reasoning are two fundamental approaches to logical thinking. While deductive reasoning moves from general principles to specific conclusions, inductive reasoning builds generalizations from specific observations. For deductive reasoning, this method starts with a general premise and applies it to a specific case to reach a logically certain conclusion. For example, all birds have feathers. A sparrow is a bird. Therefore, a sparrow has feathers. With inductive reasoning, this approach begins with specific observations and draws a probable general conclusion. For example, the sun has risen every day in recorded history. Therefore, the sun will probably rise tomorrow, or will rise tomorrow. The key difference between them is that deductive reasoning guarantees the truth of the conclusion if the premises are true, while inductive reasoning suggests the likelihood, but not certainty. The Toulmin model, developed by philosopher Stephen Toulmin, this model breaks arguments into 6 components. It's especially useful for analyzing everyday reasoning and persuasive writing. You have the claim, data, the warrant, backing, the qualifier, and rebuttal. The claim is the main point or thesis you are arguing for. So, for example, school should start later in the morning. The data would be the fact or evidence, would be the facts or information that support your claim. For example, studies show students perform better with more sleep. The warrant is the reasoning that connects the data to the claim. For example, if students get more sleep, they'll be more alert and successful. The backing is additional support for the warrant. Again, for example, sleep experts recommend 8 to 10 hours for teenagers. But you have to have a qualifier. The qualifier indicates the strength of the claim. For example, most schools should consider starting later. The rebuttal acknowledges counterarguments. So, for example, some parents may find later start times inconvenient. So, to recap, in the Toulmin model, you have 6 arguments, 6 parts of the argument: the claim, the data or evidence, the warrant, the backing, the qualifier, and the rebuttal. Logical fallacies are errors in reasoning that weaken arguments. They often seem persuasive, but lack logical validity. Recognizing fallacies helps you avoid flawed thinking and spot manipulation. There are lots of different logical fallacies, but some include straw man, ad hominem, slippery slope, false dilemma, and appeal to ignorance. So, a straw man is a fallacy that's misrepresenting someone's argument to make easier to attack. For example, here's the straw man. You want to reduce military spending? So, you want to leave the country defenseless? That's an example because the argument is about military spending, and now I'm moving it about the defense capability of a country. Ad hominem is when you're attacking the person instead of the argument. So, for example, I might say, you can't trust her opinion on climate change. She's not a scientist, right? Even though it's good to question the credibility of the arguer, again, the issue is about the effects or even the veracity of if climate change is real. Attacking somebody because they're not a scientist does not change the evidence about the probability or factualness of climate change. Slippery slope is when you're arguing that one small step will lead to a chain of extreme events. For example, if we allow students to redo assignments, soon they'll expect to retake entire courses. In this case, the idea is that if we give an inch, they'll take a mile. False dilemma is presenting only two options when more exist. For example, you're either with us or against us. Appeal to ignorance is claiming that something is true because it hasn't been proven false. In this example, I might say, no one has disproven aliens exist, so they must be real. Even though there's no evidence to prove that they do exist. It is the lack of evidence, oh, I don't know, or there's nothing that disproves it, so this must be true. Now, even if you have a well-structured argument that uses either inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning or that follows the Toulmin model and you avoid fallacies, there is still a likelihood that your opponent or your audience will not agree with you. And that is because of psychological biases. Psychological biases are mental shortcuts or tendencies that affect how we interpret information. They can distort judgment and lead to irrational decisions, even when we think we are being logical. Some biases include confirmation bias, anchoring bias, availability heuristic, bandwagon effect, or the overconfidence bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms our existing beliefs. And this can lead us to ignore contradictory evidence. Anchoring bias is relying too heavily on the first piece of information encountered. So, for example, if the first price you see for a product is $100, you may judge all other prices relative to that anchor. The availability heuristic is judging the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to your mind. If you recently saw news about plane crashes, you might overestimate the danger of flying. The bandwagon effect is adopting beliefs or behaviors because many others do. Popularity is not a substitute for truth or logic, but it is a normal thing to have. Overconfidence bias is overestimating the accuracy of your knowledge or predictions. This can lead to poor decisions and resistance to feedback. In conclusion, strong arguments rely on clear structure, valid reasoning, and awareness of human psychology. Syllogisms help us build logical conclusions, while the Toulmin model breaks down persuasive claims into their essential parts. Recognizing logical fallacy protects us from flawed thinking, and understanding psychological biases helps us reflect on how our minds shape our judgments. Together, these tools empower us to think critically, argue effectively, and communicate with integrity.